A 9-year-old girl gave a simple blue bead rosary to a forgotten man on the street. He almost threw it away. Almost. What followed felt like a chain no one could have planned. Many call it a Virgin Mary miracle that arrived on an ordinary sidewalk on an ordinary Saturday. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Most people hurry past certain figures on the sidewalk. They do not do it out of cruelty. They do it because eye contact with someone sitting on concrete creates a sharp, uncomfortable ache in the chest. The ache asks a question no one feels equipped to answer, so the gaze slides away and the steps speed up. That is how society learned to make the man disappear without ever asking him to leave. His name was Thomas, 43 years old, long, matted beard. Jacket and pants faded to the same dull gray. He occupied the third bench from the fountain in the central square every day. Same spot, same posture. An old green backpack rested under his feet like an anchor, holding everything he still owned. Thomas never held out a hand. He never spoke first. He simply watched hundreds of lives stream past, as though he were viewing them through thick glass. 2 years earlier, none of this existed. Thomas rose at 5:30, rode the 6:12 bus to the construction site, spent 9 hours carrying rebar, mixing cement, climbing scaffolding. The pay was modest, but it covered rent on a one-bedroom walk-up, groceries, and a monthly transfer to his younger brother Michael in a neighboring state. The life was plain. It was honest. It was enough. Then the general contractor lost its biggest project. Payments stopped. The company folded within weeks. Thomas searched for openings. Nothing steady appeared. Rent fell behind 1 month. Then 2. Then 3. The landlord left a final notice taped to the door. Thomas packed what fit into the backpack and walked away. At first, he told himself it would be temporary. A week on a friend's couch, maybe 2. But couches run out. Pride keeps you from asking twice. Weeks became months. Months became 11. Sleeping outdoors changes a person. Not only the body. Cold seeps into joints, skin roughens, fatigue never fully lifts. The deeper shift happens inside. Hope shrinks until it stops hurting when you touch it. Effort feels pointless. Eventually, even caring feels like too much work. Thomas reached that place quietly. He swallowed the grief, the shame, the anger. He let them settle like silt at the bottom of a river. On the surface, he simply existed. That existence is heavier than most people realize. Waking without a reason, moving without a destination, watching days bleed into each other until time loses shape. Have you ever carried a weight so constant that you forgot what lightness feels like? Thomas lived inside that weight every day. Then came the October Saturday. Sky heavy and gray, threatening rain that never arrived. Thomas sat in his usual place, backpack between his boots, oversized coat, donated by a parish months earlier, draped over his shoulders. People rushed past, heads down, earbuds in. No one met his eyes. A mother and daughter approached along the sidewalk. The girl was 9, brown hair tied in a neat ponytail. She held her mother's hand. Her name was Sophia. Her mother, Elena, was a factory seamstress who never missed Sunday, Massachusetts. Around Sophia's wrist hung a small rosary, blue glass beads, silver chain, simple crucifix. The beads came from her grandmother last birthday. "This is my treasure," the grandmother had said. "Now it belongs to you." Sophia wore it every day and never took it off. They were almost past the bench when Sophia stopped. Elena walked 2 more steps before she felt the small hand slip free. "Sophia, come on," Elena said. Sophia did not move. She stared at Thomas. Not with pity, not with fear, with steady, searching attention, as though she recognized something the rest of the city had decided to ignore. Thomas felt the gaze. He turned his face away. Sophia took 1 step closer. "Sophia," Elena said, voice firmer. Sophia glanced at her mother. Mom, wait just a second. Before Elena could object, Sophia walked directly to the bench. Thomas lifted his eyes. The child stood in front of him. Ponytail, brown eyes clear and calm. Sir, she said. She slid the rosary off her wrist. The beads swayed gently. She held it out. This is from the Virgin Mary. She takes care of everyone. Thomas stared at the object, then at the girl. Words failed him. His throat felt dry and rough. He had barely spoken in days. I don't need this, he rasped. Yes, you do, Sophia answered. No doubt. No hesitation. Complete certainty. Elena stepped closer. Sophia, sweetheart, that rosary is from Grandma. I know, but Grandma would want him to have it. Thomas looked up at Elena. Silence stretched, 3 seconds that felt much longer. Elena studied her daughter's face, saw something there she could not name, and stayed quiet. Sophia placed the rosary in Thomas's open palm. The blue beads felt cool against his calloused skin. She smiled. She'll take care of you. Then she turned, took her mother's hand again, and the two continued down the sidewalk as though nothing unusual had occurred. Thomas sat motionless. He stared at the rosary. Tiny crucifix glinted in the gray light. A strange pressure settled in his chest. Not peace, but discomfort. The object seemed heavier than it should. He closed his fingers around it, looked at the trash can 2 meters away. He almost stood up, almost walked over, almost dropped the beads inside that he did not. Instead, he pushed the rosary deep into the coat pocket and returned to staring at the passing crowd. Nothing changed. The next days looked exactly like the ones before. Wake with the sun, walk to the public restroom, sit on the bench, wait for hours to pass. Sometimes a wrapped sandwich appeared on the bench arm. Sometimes nothing. The rosary stayed in the pocket. Ignored, but never removed. Never discarded. The rosary stayed buried in the coat pocket like a stone no one noticed. Thomas told himself it meant nothing. A child's kindness. A moment that passed. Life on the bench continued exactly as before. Sun up, sun down. The same faces hurrying by. The same ache in his back from sleeping upright. Yet the beads were there. Not thrown away. Not forgotten. Just waiting. One late afternoon, about a week after Sophia walked away, the square had emptied early. Orange light stretched long across the pavement. Thomas sat with his arms crossed, staring at nothing. A woman approached. White hair neatly pinned. Beige wool coat buttoned to the neck. A small leather purse hung from her forearm. She looked ordinary, someone's grandmother on her way home from the market. She stopped directly in front of him. Thomas kept his eyes on the ground. People sometimes left food and left quickly. This one did not move. You don't have to stay here forever, you know, she said. The words landed softly but clearly. Thomas blinked. No one had spoken to him like that in months. Not a question, not pity. A simple statement that he lifted his head. I didn't ask for help. I know. She gave a small nod. There's a shelter past the bridge. The one on Carver Street. They have openings right now. Thomas frowned. He had walked past that bridge hundreds of times. Never noticed a sign. Never looked. The woman did not wait for a reply. She turned and walked away at the same measured pace she had arrived. Thomas watched her disappear around the corner. The sentence stayed behind. You don't have to stay here forever. He felt the rosary shift in his pocket when he moved his hand. He told himself it was coincidence. Just an old woman being kind. People said things. Words drifted away. But this one stuck. It circled in his mind during the cold hours that followed. He tried to push it out. Failed. 2 more weeks passed. Routine held him like iron. Yet the phrase returned every evening when the light faded. He caught himself touching the beads through the fabric without meaning to. Then came the night the wind refused to stop. Thomas curled against the bench backrest, coat pulled tight. Sleep came in pieces, shallow, restless. When it finally deepened, the dream arrived. He stood in a room made of white light. No walls he could touch. No ceiling. No floor that felt solid. Only soft brightness from every direction. In the center stood a figure he recognized instantly. Blue mantle draped over her shoulders. Face calm, eyes kind in a way that made his throat close. The Virgin Mary. No words passed between them. She simply looked at him, long enough that he felt seen, completely seen. Then she raised her right hand and pointed behind him. Thomas turned in the dream. A bridge appeared. The same iron bridge 10 minutes from the square. The one he crossed sometimes to reach the river path. He woke with his heart pounding, sweat on his skin despite the night chill. The image lingered. The bridge. The pointing hand. A direction he had never asked for. That he sat upright until dawn. When the first gray light arrived, something inside him decided. He did not think it through. He did not plan. He simply stood, shouldered the backpack, and walked toward the bridge. The shelter sat on a quiet side street. Two-story brick building. Small sign above the door, refuge house, open. Thomas stopped on the sidewalk. His hand shook when he reached for the handle. He stepped inside anyway. The lobby smelled of coffee and clean laundry. A man in his late 50s looked up from the desk. Broad shoulders, calm voice. Name tag read Robert. Need a place? Robert asked. Thomas swallowed. I think I do. Robert stood. Then you came to the right spot. He led Thomas down a short hallway to a dormitory room. 30 narrow beds lined the walls. Some occupied, some empty. Robert pointed to a bed near the window. Clean sheets. Pillow. Folded blanket. A small nightstand with a reading lamp. Thomas set the backpack down. He sat on the mattress, pressed his palm against it. Real. Solid. He reached into the coat pocket and pulled out the rosary for the first time since Sophia placed it there. Blue beads caught the lamplight. He set it carefully on the nightstand. That night Thomas lay under a blanket for the first time in nearly a year. The room was quiet except for soft breathing from the other beds. No wind. No hard bench slats digging into his spine. He closed his eyes and slept straight through until morning. He woke confused for a moment. White ceiling above him. Warmth on his skin. It took several seconds to remember. Not a dream. Real. He sat up slowly, ran a hand over his face. Felt the beard, the dirt still there. But the bed was real. Robert appeared with a towel and a small bar of soap. Showers are down the hall. Hot water works. Take your time. Thomas stood under the spray longer than necessary. Steam rose around him. Soap suds ran gray at first, then cleaner. He dried off with a towel that smelled faintly of bleach. Dressed in the same worn clothes. But he felt different. Lighter. As though one layer of weight had lifted without his permission. In the dining area, he sat at a long table. A volunteer placed a plate in front of him. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Hot. On a real plate. With a real fork. Thomas ate slowly. Each bite deliberate. Around him other men moved quietly. Some talked in low voices. Some ate in silence. Thomas kept his eyes on his plate. He was not ready for conversation. Not yet. The rosary remained on the nightstand. He looked at it each time he passed the bed. Did not touch it. Did not pray. But he did not put it back in the pocket either. It stayed there like a quiet witness to whatever was happening inside him. Days passed. Thomas kept to himself. Shower. Eat. Sit in the common room. Return to the bed. Small routines. Safe ones. After so long alone, being near other people felt strange. Loud. He answered questions with single words when he had to. Mostly, he listened. One morning Robert sat across from him in the cafeteria. Can I ask what you did before? Thomas looked up. Construction. Robert nodded. We've got a problem upstairs. Second floor needs work. Badly. Wiring's a mess. Floorboard's loose. You know that kind of job. Thomas said nothing at first. I'm not offering charity, Robert continued. I'm offering something to do with your hands. If you want. Thomas stared at his coffee. Felt the rosary upstairs on the nightstand. Felt the bridge in the dream. Felt Sophia's small hand placing the beads in his palm. He gave a short nod. I'll take a look. Thomas followed Robert up the narrow staircase to the second floor. The air smelled of dust and old paint. Light came through cracked windows and thin, dusty beams. The space looked worse than Robert had described. Exposed wires dangled from the ceiling like black vines. Several floorboards had lifted or rotted at the edges. Outlets hung loose from the walls. One section of drywall showed water stains from a long-ago leak. The whole floor felt unsafe. Robert stood in the doorway. "We want to add 10 more beds up here. Can't do it until this is solid." Thomas walked the length of the room. He crouched, tested a board with his weight, ran his fingers along a wire to check for live current, made mental notes. His hands remembered the work even if his mind had tried to forget. "I can start with the wiring," he said. "That's the most dangerous part right now." Robert nodded. "Tools are in the basement. Take what you need. Materials are limited, but I'll get more when I can." Thomas went down alone that afternoon. Found a battered toolbox, some electrical tape, wire cutters, a few screwdrivers. Nothing fancy. Enough to begin. He carried it upstairs and started. First, he killed the breaker for the floor. Tested every outlet. Isolated the live wires that posed immediate risk. Wrapped exposed ends. Rerouted cables along baseboards where he could secure them. Replaced 3 dead outlets with ones he salvaged from a storage closet. Worked methodically. No rush. No audience. Just the job. By the end of the first day, his shoulders ached in a familiar way. The good ache of muscles remembering purpose. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Looked at what he had done. Small progress, but real. The next morning he returned without being asked. Continued with the flooring. Pried up loose boards carefully. Checked the subfloor underneath. Found dry rot in 2 spots. Cut out the bad sections with a handsaw Robert lent him. Patched with scraps from downstairs. Nailed everything back tight. Improvised where he had to. The result was not showroom quality. It was sturdy. That was enough. Late on the second day, Pete appeared in the doorway. Pete was a resident, mid-50s, quiet, former truck driver. He had tried talking to Thomas in the cafeteria once and received a one-word answer. This time he did not speak right away. Just watched. "You did all that?" Pete finally asked. "Working on it," Thomas said without looking up. Pete stepped inside. "Need a hand holding that board while you nail?" Thomas paused, looked at Pete, considered, then nodded. "Hold it here. Steady." Pete knelt and braced the plank. Thomas drove the nails. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. When the board was secure, Pete stood. "Anything else?" Thomas pointed to a stack of salvaged lumber. "Sort those by length. Anything usable goes here." Pete did it. No complaint. The following day, another man joined. Carlos, younger, former mechanic. He brought his own small set of pliers. Watched Thomas work for a while, then asked questions. Thomas answered. Short sentences at first, then longer. Explained why certain wires needed grounding. Showed how to test a circuit without burning fingers. Carlos listened, then helped up. By the end of the week, 3 men worked alongside Thomas. No one was paid. No one was forced. They came because the work felt useful. Because watching a room come back to life reminded them they could still do something worthwhile. Robert checked progress every few days. Stood in the doorway, arms crossed, taking it in. "Thomas, this place is starting to look like something," he said one afternoon. "Ceiling still needs attention," Thomas replied. "And we're short on sheetrock and compound." Robert wrote the list Thomas gave him. 2 days later, a delivery arrived. Donation from a local hardware store owner Robert knew from church. Bags of joint compound. Sheets of drywall. Nails. Tape. Enough to finish. They tackled the ceiling next. Thomas taught the others how to measure, cut, lift, and screw panels into place. How to tape seams straight. How to mud and sand without leaving ridges. Progress sped up. The room transformed. Walls straightened. Wires hidden. Floor even and safe. Ceiling smooth and white. 3 weeks after the first nail, Robert walked the finished floor. 10 new beds could fit comfortably. Mattresses already stacked in the hall waiting. He turned to Thomas. "You turned this into a home for 10 more people." Thomas shrugged. "Just did what I know." Robert studied him. You're good at this. Really good. Thomas looked at the clean lines of the room, felt something stir in his chest. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet pride. The kind he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He thought of the bench outside, thought of Sophia's small hand, thought of the rosary still sitting on his nightstand downstairs. That evening Robert found him in the cafeteria. I know a man who runs a maintenance company, Robert said. Small outfit, residential and light commercial. He's always looking for reliable hands. I told him about the work you did here. He wants to meet you. Thomas set his coffee down. I don't have papers. No references except this place. You've got the shelter address. And you've got me. I'll vouch for what I've seen with my own eyes. Thomas stayed silent a long moment. Felt the weight of the offer. Felt the risk of hoping again. Pass my name along, he said finally. Robert smiled. Interviews next week. I'll get you something clean to wear from donations. Thomas nodded once. Went upstairs. Sat on his bed. Looked at the blue rosary on the nightstand. Ran his thumb over one bead. Then another that he did not speak to it. Did not pray aloud. But in the quiet room, he felt something shift again. Small. Steady. Like a door that had been stuck for a long time finally giving way. The interview was set for the following Thursday. Thomas spent the days before in quiet preparation. Robert found him a clean button-down shirt and dark pants from the donation closet. Both fit reasonably well after Thomas washed them twice in the shelter laundry. He trimmed his beard with borrowed clippers until it looked deliberate instead of wild. Each night, he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the rosary on the nightstand. No words came, just a long, steady gaze. Then he would lie down and stare at the ceiling until sleep took him. The morning of the interview, he woke before the alarm Robert had lent him. Showered carefully, dressed slowly, put the rosary in the front pocket of the shirt. Not deep in the coat this time, but close enough to feel its small weight against his chest. He walked the 4 blocks to the address Robert had written down. The office sat above a hardware store on a side street. Narrow stairs. Door with a simple sign. Greg Harlan Maintenance Services. Greg was waiting behind a desk covered in invoices and coffee rings. Late 40s. Short sleeves rolled up. Hands that looked like they still knew tools. He stood when Thomas entered. Robert speaks highly of you, Greg said. Sit. Thomas sat, hands on his knees to keep them still. Robert says you basically rebuilt the second floor of Refuge House. That true. I did what needed doing. Thomas answered. Greg leaned back. He showed me pictures. Wiring neat. Floor solid. Ceiling smooth. 10 new beds because of it. That's not small work. Thomas nodded once. Look, I'll be straight, Greg continued. I usually want resumes, certifications, past employers who'll pick up the phone. You don't have any of that right now. Thomas felt the familiar tightness in his throat. He waited for the no, but Robert's word carries weight with me, Greg said. I've known him 15 years. If he says you're reliable and you know the trade, that's enough for a start. When can you begin? Thomas blinked. Tomorrow. 7 sharp. Greg smiled for the first time. Tomorrow it is. Wear work boots if you've got them. We do plumbing, electrical, drywall, painting, whatever the client needs. Pays fair. Hours are steady. Show up on time. Do the job right. We'll get along. Thomas stood, legs unsteady for a second. He shook Greg's hand. Firm grip on both sides. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Greg replied. Earn it. Thomas walked down the stairs and out into bright sunlight. He stopped on the sidewalk, closed his eyes, let the warmth hit his face. Then the tears came, silent, unstoppable. Not loud sobs, just release. He had a job. Steady. Paid. Tomorrow, the first week tested him. Heavy lifting. Crawling under houses to fix leaking pipes. Replacing outlets in tight closets. Painting ceilings until his arms burned. Every task reminded him of the old life before the fall. Muscles remembered. Hands remembered. At the end of each day, he returned to the shelter exhausted in the best way. Tired from honest work. Friday afternoon, Greg called him into the small office trailer at one of the job sites. You work like a man with something to prove, Greg said. Maybe I do, Thomas answered. Greg nodded. Keep it up. You're good. Thomas walked back to the crew with steadier steps. Someone had noticed. Someone had said the work was good. Simple words. Enormous weight lifted. He stayed at the shelter 2 more months. Saved every paycheck. Kept expenses low. Ate shelter meals when he could. Bought only what he needed. By the end of those months, he had enough for first month's rent and a small deposit on a single room downtown. The day he signed the lease, he stood in the hallway holding the key, turned it in the lock, pushed the door open. One room, twin bed, small closet, shelf on the wall, wooden floor worn but clean, window overlooking a parking lot. Nothing fancy. Everything he needed. He dropped the backpack inside, sat on the bed, looked around, felt the silence settle. Not empty silence, but his silence, his space, his home. Robert walked him to the shelter door the day he left. Gave him a quick, strong hug. You know where I am if you need anything, Robert said. I know. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me, Robert told him. Thank whoever carried you this far. Thomas moved in that afternoon. Unpacked the few things he owned. Placed the rosary on the shelf beside an old photo he had carried since the streets began. Him and his younger brother Michael at a 4th of July barbecue 5 years earlier. Both smiling. Both hold that he looked at the photo every day. Thought of Michael every day. They had not spoken in over 2 years. Thomas had called once from a payphone after losing the apartment. Michael never picked up. Thomas never tried again. Shame and pride had built a wall too high to climb. Now the wall felt thinner. He had an address, a job, clean clothes, a phone Robert had helped him get, a basic one with prepaid minutes. He stared at the number in his contacts for weeks. Opened it, closed it, opened it again. One night, he sat on the bed edge, looked at the rosary, looked at the photo, looked at the phone. His thumb hovered over the call button. What if Michael refused to answer? What if the silence on the other end was worse than no call at all? He almost set the phone down. Then he looked at the rosary again. Remembered Sophia's voice. She takes care of everyone. He pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Thomas started to pull the phone away. Hello. The voice was Michael's. Older, tired, but unmistakable. Thomas closed his eyes. Michael, it's Thomas. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Thomas? Oh God. Thomas. The line went quiet except for uneven breathing. I looked for you, Michael said finally. I called your old number. It was disconnected. I drove by the apartment. Nobody knew where you went. I thought. I didn't know if you were still alive. I'm okay now, Thomas said. I'm okay. Where are you? Tell me the address. I'll come. Thomas gave it. Michael lived 4 hours away. Promised to drive over that weekend. When the call ended, Thomas's hands shook, chest tight with something close to joy. He looked at the rosary on the shelf. Thank you, he whispered. Saturday morning the knock came. Thomas opened the door. Michael stood there, hair shorter, face lined, eyes wet. They looked at each other a long moment. No words at first. Then Michael stepped forward and pulled Thomas into a hard embrace. Both men cried without shame. They held on like they were afraid the other would vanish again. Michael stepped inside, looked around the small room. You kept the photo, he said, seeing it on the shelf. Carried it everywhere, Thomas told him. Streets. Shelter. Here. It was the only thing that reminded me who I used to be. They sat, made coffee, talked for hours. Michael explained the calls he had made, the worry that never left. Thomas told the whole story, from the bench to Sophia to the rosary to the dream to Robert to Greg to this room. Every step, every impossible turn. Michael listened without interrupting. When Thomas finished, Michael stayed quiet a long time. What do you think it all was? He asked. Thomas looked at the rosary. I don't know exactly, but I was sitting on that bench with no reason left to stand up. Now I'm here, with a job, a place. My brother's sitting across from me. I can't explain it with just luck. Michael reached out and touched the photo. Then the rosary. Whatever it was, he said, I'm glad it found you. Michael stayed until Sunday evening. They ate simple meals Thomas prepared on the small hot plate, talked about old memories, laughed at stories they had not remembered in years. When Michael left, he hugged Thomas again at the door, promised to call every week, promised to bring his wife and son next time. The months that followed moved steadily forward. Greg noticed Thomas's consistency. Never late, never complained. Finished jobs cleanly and ahead of schedule when possible. 5 months after the start, Greg called Thomas into the trailer office. "You're the most dependable man I've got," Greg said. "Never miss a day. Do more than asked. I'm giving you a raise." Thomas looked at the new pay rate on the paper. More than he expected. "Thank you," he said. "You earned every cent," Greg replied. With the extra income, Thomas searched for a slightly larger place. Found a one-bedroom apartment on a quiet street. Living room small but separate. Kitchen with a real stove. Bathroom with good water pressure. A dining table that seated two. Windows that looked out on trees instead of asphalt. He signed the lease the same day. Moving day took one trip. Backpack plus a few boxes from the dollar store. He hung shirts on hangers in the closet. Something so ordinary it almost made him pause. Hung a shirt. Stepped back. Looked at it hanging straight. Smiled to himself. Small victories accumulate that he bought things slowly. Plates that matched. A coffee maker. A pot for soup. Each purchase felt like proof. Proof he was building again. Proof the bench no longer owned him. One Saturday, Michael arrived with his wife Lon and their 6-year-old son. Thomas cooked spaghetti with sauce from a jar. Nothing fancy. Everyone 8 seconds. Asked to see the toolbox Greg had given Thomas as a bonus. Thomas opened it on the living room floor. Showed each tool. Explained what it did. Held the pliers like they were made of gold. Thomas watched the boy's face and felt warmth spread through his chest. If this scene, brother, sister-in-law, nephew, laughter around a small table, was not part of the miracle, he did not know what was. He began attending Sunday Massachusetts. Not because anyone pressured him, not because he suddenly became devout, because the church felt like the right place to be. He sat in the last pew, stayed quiet, listened to the readings, held the rosary in his pocket during the consecration. Each bead reminded him of Sophia, of the sidewalk, of the girl who looked at him when no one else would. Exactly 1 year after that October Saturday, Thomas returned to the square. The bench waited in the same spot. Paint chipped in the same places. He stood in front of it a long time, then sat down, held the rosary between his fingers, closed his eyes. Memories came in waves. The cold that never left his bones. The silence that swallowed every day. The way people looked through him as if he were already gone. The weight of giving up that he opened his eyes. Looked at the sky. Clear blue. A few clouds drifting. "Thank you," he said softly. To the air. To the mother who had listened when he had no words left. To Sophia. To the woman in the beige coat. To Robert. To Greg. To Michael. To everyone who had refused to let him disappear. That he stood. Put the rosary back in his pocket. Walked away from the bench. Not running from anything anymore. Walking toward home. That night in the apartment, he sat in the living room. The rosary rested on the shelf beside the new photo. Thomas, Michael, Lon, and Huey at the last 4th of July barbecue. All smiling. All together, he picked up the rosary. Ran his fingers slowly over each bead. Then it came, a clear, strong scent of roses. No flowers in the room. No air freshener. No open window carrying perfume from outside. Just roses. Sweet. Sudden. Present. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Then faded. Thomas sat still. Smiled. Did not question it. Simply accepted it as one more gift in a long line of gifts he had never earned but received anyway. Change rarely arrives with trumpets. It arrives in small steps. A child's hand. A stranger's words. A dream in the night. A door that opens when you finally reach for the handle. A brother's voice on the phone. A job that lasts. A key to a room that belongs to you. Thomas cannot prove it was the Virgin Mary. He cannot draw a straight line from the blue beads to this quiet, ordinary happiness. But he knows the path he walked, knows where it started, knows where it led. Sometimes one small gesture breaks the darkness. Sometimes the mother reaches through the ordinary to touch someone who had stopped believing anyone still cared. Before we conclude, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Join our prayer community dedicated to the Virgin Mary, made up of people from different parts of the world who share the same purpose of faith. If in your heart you feel the desire to participate in this chain of prayer, click the button below. Become a channel member and come pray with us. And if you made it this far to the end of Thomas's story, do something for me. Write in the comments, Sophia, the name of the girl who stopped when everyone else walked right past. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. Every time I read that name, I'll know one more person believes that Virgin Mary miracles still happen today. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Write in the comments about a miracle you've witnessed or experienced. Share this video with someone who needs hope right now. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your entire family. Amen.